your second name, Don?
McWilliams.
McWilliams.
Yeah. Very good. So I suppose we're just going to start off with. Yeah, but don't worry, we can edit all this out. We're just going to start with questions about, there's questions here like where were you born and raised and blah blah blah. But instead, I'm just going to give you an opportunity, introduce yourself, and let me know what your current role is, and then we'll take a look back into your, in your childhood and growing up and all that, and then kind of move forward. So.
Okay, my name's Niall. I'm born and raised in Dermot Hill. I'm living in Dermot Hill still. I moved about 4 doors away from the house that I grew up on in, and I'm raising my family there now. I'm currently the manager of the Upper Springfield Development Trust Youth and Community Services team, which basically is the Upper Springfield Youth Work Project based in the Upper Springfield Development Trust, and then Youth and Community Centre, which is a youth club and after schools and all sorts of support, whatever really needed. And we also have a health and wellbeing programme, so there's a good range of community services that we sort of deliver. Again, I'm also on the board of Glór na Móna, and have been for the last sort of maybe 2 years. And as I say, I've a long track record. I've been involved in community work in Upper Springfield probably maybe nearly 20 years.
Right. And so you were born and raised, well, you were saying 4 doors down from where you are now, but what school did you go to whenever what school did you attend when you were growing up in the area, and do you have any kind of abiding memories of being at school growing up in Upper Springfield?
I went to St Aidan's, which was the precursor, was the male Christian Brothers School at the time, which was precursor to John Paul II. And funny enough, I'm born in 1977, and my mother and father had registered me for Bunskull and football first year. But I was quite a clingy child, and there was dynamics there in terms of travelling and getting on the bus. So the rally was in St Aidan's, was at the bottom of the street, and so I followed my 2 older brothers, Terry and Liam, who had attended St Aidan's. Liam was actually leaving he was sort of just leaving primary 7 just as I was entering the school. So I had 2 brothers who had set the historical context in terms of like what my role as a male inmate going into St Aidan's would be. As I say, but instantly I was meant to go to Bunskull football first, and there had been the myth in the family is the legend in the family is that in 1979 there was a protest outside Armagh Jail, and I was already a clingy child at this time, so this was an event organised by Women Against Imperialism, and my mother was arrested. So the clingy child was taken off my mother, Mary, and given to my aunt, who was one of the other people that I would go to, who was then also arrested, and so I was then handed down the line to whoever it was. So the talk was that after that, the level of clinginess and attachment to my man had went through the roof, so there was no getting me to go to Bunskull football first on a bus by myself. And so my main memories are my man bringing me to school in St Aidan's, and for the first year in primary 1 she had to come in every single day at lunchtime and sit with me. And there was about 4 or 5 other boys who also sat with my ma on the lunchtime, and I still know them. They're people who know about the road, and my ma still says she still sees them about it, but they sat with me and my ma every day for a year until I was then able to then run the gauntlet of St Aidan's, which was mad. I was lucky enough that I could run fast and play sport. That sort of got me through St Aidan's. It was very tough, it was very hard. Teachers could hit you, parents could hit you, the Brits could shoot you, the Ra could shoot you. It was a very, very violent time, and you could only really get through it 2 ways, either by fighting or playing sport. And I managed to sort of play my way through the survival of St Aidan's.
And what would your sport be? Did you play everything, or
done everything? So, and this is where we're lucky. The Christian Brothers were, particularly Brother Cromie, who was sort of one of the main Christian Brothers, who was really, really strong on all sport and Irish culture in particular. So we played Gaelic, we played hurling, we played handball, we played basketball. Sports day was a massive big deal. I always say to people that, like, people think that I go to my own kids' primary school sports day, and it's all based on fun and participation. And I was saying, well, St. Aidan's sports day was cutthroat, but it was my day. Every other day belonged to the kids who could do maths and English, but sports day, that was my day. That was where I sort of came into my own. So I had to keep my head down, try my best to get through the year, and then get the sports day. And then, as I say, that was my day. So that was luck. I was lucky in that regard. Sport was such a big thing because I was athletic and sporty. It sort of got me through it. But again, a big massive thing coming through the school was, could you fight? And again, I had two older brothers who preceded me, who liked fighting. I didn't like fighting.
You were sportsman.
So I had to pretend. So I had to pretend I could fight. And luckily enough, because you were sort of athletic, maybe people thought you could fight.
Yeah.
which I was never actually ever tested in battle, if you like.
You proved your medal on sports day every year, and that's enough.
No, that's it.
And so, is sport something that then you have carried with you? I'm thinking as you moved on to secondary school and then maybe on to later on in life, are you still involved with sport or?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sort of the background noise in my life. I mean, growing up, the main sport was the main thing. So, who's the best fighter? Who's the fastest runner? Who could jump the highest? Who's the best field player? Who's against football? They were all the major questions in our family growing up. So that was a major thing. And then the other background noise was the politics of this place. So, war, protest, politics. They were sort of the two major defining sort of aspects of your life, other than your general adolescent development, getting through each day and making friends and stuff like that. So the background noise was sport and sort of and politics. And again, that sort of continued to define me. I played sport all through my adolescence. I was a very good soccer player. I played for that. I played 6 counties. I travelled to Manchester United. I later played for Linfield. I was the first Catholic to play for Linfield. I played for Cliftonville. I was the first Catholic in sort of 50 years to come through the youth team and play for the first team. I then played Gaelic football for Antrim. So sport has always been something that I've been involved with. And then with the politics sort of in the background, I suppose as I became a man then, I sort of drifted away from soccer because the politics of it, it didn't relate to my understanding of the world, where the GAA was almost like sort of fitted hand in glove in terms of my politics. So you're able to play sport, develop yourself in the sporting context, but there was also those connotations of reclaiming culture, building community, and enhancing the health and well-being of the community, whereas the world of soccer was very much based around the paradigm of elite sport and professional sport and wanting to be the best, and there was no real loyalty and there was no real community in it. So I suppose over time then, throughout my adulthood, by sort of my early 20s then, I was then completely focused on a sporting context in Gordon and Mona, and then also then the impact that they had in terms of my activism as well, which was obviously then a natural precursor, because you wanted to be good, you wanted your team to be good, you wanted your club to be good, so you then got involved in the organisation side of things as well. So I feel like the GAA provided the coming together of those two sort of sides to my backstory, if you like, in terms of the sport and the community and politics.
Yeah. And then I suppose now that you've mentioned your involvement in community activism, what is your would you credit sport with getting you into the position where you are now, and your current position, what does that involve in terms of your activism?
Okay, well, sport, not really. Sport has been a good part of it in terms of the Gordon and Mona, but again, family context is really important in this regard. My mother and my father were both political activists. They were both community activists. So when there was something happening within the community, our family and my parents in particular would have been involved in the conversation, and that could have been anything from the Relevant Action Committee, which later turned into the anti-H Black movement. It could have been the civil rights movement. It could have been organising workers. It could have been organising women. It could have been organising childcare in the local community. It could have been representing families of prisoners. It the Black Mountain Environmental. So there was a whole range of stuff. I suppose then a sort of key element then in the story, and sort of my story in terms of my active involvement then, comes in sort of the early 1990s when I'm just becoming political. I was attending St Mary's at that time. I was doing politics and history. I was becoming more interested in how the world was organised. It was a very political time. First ceasefires, August '94, Down Street Declaration, coming up to Good Friday. So I was becoming increasingly politically conscious. And I suppose at that stage I was almost like becoming politically conscious, and I was playing soccer, and they were two completely separate things. They weren't linked in any way. They were almost like two separate versions of me. You know, I went and played soccer and played for Linfield, being the only Catholic playing, and they were singing "Come On the Billy Boys," and then you would have been involved in your community. So just at that time, coming out of the peace process then, my dad, Terry and I, would have been particularly prominent in rebuilding the community in terms of like coming out of conflict, but it would have been one of the community leaders at the time beginning to ask, what type of community do we deserve as a people? What type of services do we deserve as a people? And he would have been right at the forefront of visioning what we needed in the area, whether that was Irish language medium provision, whether it was youth centres and stuff like that. And just at that time, there was a subculture had emerged around young people. So young people who were very, very marginalised, but also had become marginalised within their communities, and were involved in at that time what was called hooding. So there was a whole subculture around hooding, and at that time how the community dealt with it, there was no policing service, there was a policing vacuum, there was a criminal justice vacuum. So what happened was that local people went to the IRA, and the IRA did what they did, which was had guns to shoot people or to punish people or whatever, so physical punishments, put them out, exclusions. So at that time in the early 1980s, how we were dealing with very troubled young people was by harming them and excluding them. And I suppose my father would have been one of those people at that time saying, look, we need to move away from it. What we actually need to do is include these people, and very much the maximum Mullinay August Chubbies. You need to praise these young people, encourage them, foster them, grow them. That's how we will develop them rather than attacking them, because what you're effectively doing is not only are you brutalising young people, you're brutalising the community, but also the people who are carrying out the violence are further brutalising themselves as well. So it's a vicious cycle, so we need to get away from that. And just at that point, my oldest brother Terry was involved in outdoor pursuits and youth work with a city centre-based organisation called Challenge for Youth. Challenge for Youth at that time would have been one of the pioneers in terms of like using outdoor activities as a means of engaging with really troubled young people, those young people who were on probation in the criminal justice system. And Terry had found himself really good at that. He had come through the school system, left school with no qualifications, had been involved in the criminal justice system himself through the fighter and all that type of stuff. So he understood the anger that was built up in a lot of these young people and their sense of isolation, and he was really, really attuned in terms of engaging them. So he was doing this work, and it just so happened then that there was an opportunity in the Upper Springfield to get a bit of funding. So in around 1993, £7.5 million came into this area. My dad would have been really, really central to that money coming in, but he was also listening very, very closely to what Terry had been saying in terms of what this community needed. And he was saying, we need to engage these young people. So the £7.5 million that we got was developed with what was called then the Urban Initiative. And the Urban Initiative basically focused on young people aged 11 plus. And it was basically an intermediate employment model. So the idea was we were going to get 75 young people under the age of 25, and we were going to give them employment. But not only were we going to give them employment, but we were going to give them training. So it was going to be a 3-year post. They were going to get real development, real training, and potentially a career out of it. And at the same time, those 75 young people would then be working in their community, outdoor pursuits, sports, education, youth. So this was really sort of paramount, and this was sort of in the background. I can remember these conversations, I can remember the big deal when at this time, the upper spring is an unemployment backstop. So 75 young people coming from families where there was historical unemployment over generations, get jobs that pay them a good wage, but also have potential for upward mobility. So what had a massive ripple effect in the community, not just in terms of the 75 young people, but those families were really proud of, say, a young person who was 18 and got a job. They were going to learn how to become a youth worker and get the professional qualification and go to university and learn how to take people up the mountain and stuff. So this was really a real source of pride for people. So that became a massive thing. So that's really, really important in terms of the background. Again, sort of background for me, it wasn't overly central to what I was. Again, I was playing sport. But what then happened, and again, this is in terms of my historical and sort of my life course, is that Art Harry was murdered then in 1988. He was murdered just about 6 months into this. He secured one of those jobs in the Urban Initiative as a sort of trainee manager, managing the outdoor pursuits. So he was basically managing 10 local people, and he was going to get them their outdoor pursuits and mountaineering and whitewater rafting and stuff like that. So that was his job, and he was killed about 6 or 7 months into that post. And if you like, that was a real crystallisation of all that background noise that had been happening, the sport and the politics and the community, and then the personal story. And what happened after that was Terry's death had a real galvanising impact in this community in terms of, like, he was seen as a bit of a beacon of hope and stuff. 10,000 people attended his funeral. It was the biggest single funeral since the hunger strikes. There was a real outpouring of grief. The GA, Gordon and Mona, really came to the fore in supporting us as their family. The community structures within this area really came to the fore in supporting this family. And I suppose from that moment on, I had sort of unconsciously made a decision that my life would be spent sort of doing some of the similar stuff, which is maybe putting back into that community, and I suppose using the spark, whether it was anger or pain or whatever, and trying to use that for some sort of force for good. And I suppose from that moment on, my major trajectory has been how do I make the Upper Springfield, the village that I live in, as strong as it possibly could, because we have the most amazing people, we have the most amazing story of resistance, and we need to galvanise that and use that. But at the same time, we are the community that is oppressed more than any other in terms of socio-economic indicators around deprivation and health and well-being and stuff, and that is not fair. It's not fair that 20 years after the Good Friday Agreement that the White Rock 1 and Ballinmurphy 1 are still the most unemployed wards and the most unequal wards. Like 50 years from the civil rights movement, So some of those, that key personal thing was a really sort of key moment in terms of my own development and sort of lighting that spark.
Yes.
That's with me ever since.
Well, yes. Sorry to hear about that as well. I know it's clearly has had a very galvanising effect on you, and I think one of the things that I picked up on, especially. I'm thinking about the title of the series of interviews that we're doing is Fui Scahach Leva, so in the shelter of the mountain. How important is even the physical kind of place having a resource in a way, like the Black Mountain and the local area, because I think sometimes as well, in this area and in West Belfast in general, sometimes it does get a bad rap for things like you're saying, people stealing cars and litter or noise or anything like that. But how important is that natural kind of, that is the mountain and nature in this area, because it seems to be something that, again, you have a connection with.
Yeah. I places, what struck me about, and this is I suppose the lessons from when Terry was murdered, is the place became really important. This community became a haven for us. Everybody sort of put their arms around you, and there was a sense, and that wasn't just even the people, but it was the comfort of the mountain and the park and the graveyard and all those physical amenities that we have, and everything that we have done so far as a family, like Furrows and activities involved in Glúine, so we established with the Glúine, the work that I've done in Springfield, the work we've done with Gordon, the work we've done with Lake Loughley, all of that is about using the people of this community and the place as its single biggest sort of resource. So that is absolutely crucial to it. And again, it's that important paradox at the centre of the story of the Upper Springfield and West Belfast, which is we're getting fucked over in loads of ways, and we have done for a century. But despite that, we have this most amazing story of local people and human agency building things for themselves in spite of the structural limitations of modern society. So the Irish language sector is built by our people. You know, the community that's building that we're in now is built by our people. Every community organisation in this area is built by local people. You know, so there's something really, really powerful about that, and it's not something, I suppose it's, and sometimes we can be, as a community, we can be very sort of down on ourselves. But an interesting thing that happens is, if you ever speak to somebody who's travelling here, and you tell them about the community, and they come to visit your projects, you give them that story of that paradox of it's challenging, it's terrible, and we've done this and that, but here's what we have done. We are the risen people. So you give them that story. Sometimes when we're talking to ourselves and we're planning ourselves, we can almost, like, I suppose, give too much credence and too much energy to that negative side. And I suppose one of the things is coming into work every day as somebody who's working in the community sector now and working with young people and managing people, is at the forefront of your minds, thinking about those giants who went before us, the work that was done in really difficult and challenging times when people were getting dragged to their houses in the early hours of the morning and interned and imprisoned and whatever. And the privileged position that I now see myself in as somebody who happens to be getting a wage to be working within his community, to be working on behalf of his own children, his nieces, nephews, his mother, his father, his granny, his grandparents, his kids' friends, his local GAA club. So I'm in a really, really privileged position. So I try to come into work with that sense of positive energy rather than being oppressed by, oh fuck, you know, Jesus, like, things are so bad, we're still the most unequal society in the world, our health and well-being, suicides through the roof, unemployment's through the roof. All that's true, but it's the Marxist Antonio Gramsci talks about optimism of the will and the pessimism of the intellect. So I try to bring the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will into work every sort of day, because otherwise you probably put the blanket over your head and go, there's just too much to do. And so part of what we're doing, part of what we do in this community, and part of what I try to do is, like, it's just open the curtains a wee bit. There's lots of problems, but if we can just shine wee bits of light and hope, then you hope that the curtains open a wee bit more sort of every day. So that's sort of the approach. And again, and this is a mad thing, that there's the politics of trying to create a more equal society, and the fact that we are on the downside of power relations. But what that means in practical terms is having an after schools project in which you tie the kids' laces and wipe their noses and wipe away their tears, in which you have a youth centre in which you split the kids up from fighting, and you pay pool, and you know, you provide counselling services, and you organise festivals. So in practical terms, the politics of the wider politics of how we are impacted by global inequality and British imperialism, how it manifests is your actions during the day are, let's do things that help our people and are relevant to our people, and that means cleaning their snottery and kids' snottery noses, wiping their eyes, lifting them up, encouraging them, supporting them, getting their qualifications, all that sort of rather grey stuff.
Yeah.
But when it combines, it's really, really powerful.
Yes.
I think we're sitting in Dram Jar, and we're sitting in Glonarona here, and Dram Jars are really, really, really good microcosm of what is needed. The Dram Jar campaign and the success that it had at a macro political level can only happen because of the work that's going on a Tuesday night in the like a Glonarona or Glonarona or Bunskull Football First or Bunskull Slippigive. All that day-to-day nitty-gritty, building the language, building people, supporting people, that doesn't seem like it has any political intent whatsoever. That's the stuff that forms the bedrock of 20,000 people going on the streets and bringing down Stormont, and then recreating the type of structural change that we need in terms of legislation around the language.
And then you just mentioned Andram Jarrig there too, and in terms of, again, the wider idea of community improvement and empowerment, how important is it, do you think, to have to foster strong links between kind of disparate groups in the community, because again, sometimes when people don't have maybe a personal connection to a certain youth club or sports team, they themselves might feel slightly out of the loop. So how important is it they foster links between groups in that way?
I mean, what we know now about the personal, about what makes people healthy. So we know you have to watch what you put into your body. You have to do some exercise, and you have to get it back, and you have to be connected. That's what we know now. We think that's been proven by empirical evidence and scientific evidence. So we need to be connected to people as human beings. And the same goes for groups. If we're working away on our own, if Gordon and Mona are working away on their own, doing their stuff around the language and thing, but they're not connected to other youth providers, or what's going on in the school system, or what's going on in terms of mental health, or what's going on in terms of like the physical buildings, the physical infrastructure in this community, then you're pissing in the wind. So we need to be connecting all those dots up. So and again, if you think about it in those terms, in terms of what the practical community, how you politicise the practical action of community development and youth work and stuff, is that you work with the individual in order to support them so they can be the best version of themselves. But that involves naturally then connecting them to other people and tying them to organisations and communities and groups of community, whether that's through the GAA. It then involves those groups connecting to other groups, and from that you build a sense of community. Now, if we can build 50 communities in Ireland and then connect those communities in Ireland, then you have a revolution. So that's really what you're doing. And what it comes down to then is getting up out of bed every day and doing the practical work. But the joining of the dots has to be in your head. And I think where people who are involved in this work get despondent is because they don't maybe see the wood for the trees, because they're so busy acting and doing the work and stuff that actually they begin to lose the politics of it. And that's easy to be done, particularly because funders set an agenda, policy sets an agenda and stuff like that, but you can still do all the stuff the government wants and policy wants at the same time as doing what we need, which is really building people and building a community.
Yeah. Because then I suppose exactly what we're speaking about, you yourself would be somewhat of a manifestation of that, because you are involved in multiple groups, aren't you, as well? So you're involved still with Gordon and Mona, and also with New Hill Football Club, and then there's your day job then as well.
If I could make some sense of it for you, I'm a paid employee of the Upper Springfield Development Trust as the Youth and Community Services Manager. So my paid employment is managing a youth project, I'm managing a youth centre, but we're always trying to push the boundaries around what that means. So at the minute, I manage a youth centre, a youth project that works with young people who are not using mainstream youth facilities, who are maybe detached or disengaged. I manage a youth centre, a part-time youth centre in New Hill. I manage a health and wellbeing project, which is supporting people with social, physical, emotional resilience issues. Support a mentoring programme, which supports children aged sort of 8 to 18 who are maybe having more complex needs in terms of their social connections. I take Gordon and Mona's under 17, and as outside of that work then, I take Gordon and Mona's under 17 Gaelic team, who are all young people from the community in which I'm paid to work. I'm an organiser with Gordon and Mona in the community in which I'm paid to work. I'm on the board of Gordon and Mona, and I've been sort of supporting Gordon and Mona throughout their journey for the last 10 years in terms of developing their aspect of work through Irish medium youth work, Irish medium family work, festival programmes and stuff like that. I was also involved in advising and supporting Lakewood Loughley in their establishment. So when you begin to put the paid work and your volunteer work together, you have a big mishmash of stuff that's interrelated and interlinked. Now, the problem with that is there's an awful lot there, and it's sometimes hard to dissever from what is work and what is just everyday madness. I basically fire it all into a big box and try and get it done within 7 days, and it never takes 37 and a half hours. But I'm always constantly trying to connect those things. So the festival that we run in May, for example, Feeling Like Ligany Gorma, which is the festival of the Bluebells, which we had as our themes: community, well-being, environment and heritage. That was like a coming together of those various disparate sections and saying, like, could we get something, because sometimes you go, right, how do we develop a strategy around whatever, and then you go, right, let's do something practical so people can begin to see it. So we've used Feeling Like Ligany Gorma almost like as a practical action kit for bringing those disparate groups together. So that week of activities will have walks, talks, discussions, debates, fun days for every single age group, across GAA, across women, across men, across older people, across younger people, all bringing that together. And it's a really good example of sort of how we do that. So in a sense, my paid work and my volunteer work are the same thing. And I'm lucky enough in that I am the boss of my project, I'm the manager of the project, so it's up to me to manage my time. As long as I'm meeting 5-6 targets for my employers and their funders, what I can do the rest of that is up to me. And here's one of the problems in the community sector at the minute. The community sector has become very funding driven. So they get £500,000 to deliver 50 cornflakes boxes to families, and they do that. But what do they do with the rest of their time? Okay, so that's done, that's fine. Here, delivering the cornflakes boxes to the families is fine, but there's loads of other hours in the day. What we're trying to do within our version of community work, which is paid employment, it's not active, it's paid work, is we're going, right, okay, well, you've met your targets, how much more time have we got? You are, like, for our employees, you are 37 and a half hours engine for community change. How do we get the most of that? And at the same time making sure that you have a relationship with your wife and your kids and your space to get a coffee or a pint or whatever it is using your time, but we want to get as much as possible that 37 and a half hours of engine of change. And you tick in your box and delivering your programme for the funder. That's not our agenda, that's somebody else's agenda. And we try to join those things up, but there's more to be done. So we're constantly pushing the boat out in terms of what we're trying to do. As I say, I was employed 12 years ago as the youth coordinator of a youth project. 10 years later, not even 10 years later, 8 years later, whatever it is, we are, my maths is bad, but whatever amount of years it is later, we're running a multifaceted community project which meets the needs of the entire population, because we were just constantly pushing and squeezing and getting as much out of the time as possible and altering people's jobs and being creative around that and getting down money and giving the funders what they wanted and then doing more, taking that, doing half of that and 3 of this, all the stuff that we've done. So we set the agenda. Too much of the community sector, the agenda has been set by government and by institutional bureaucracies. So the organisations, in order to survive, have to create a governance and a financial monster, if you like, that needs fed. And you can spend your entire day, you can spend 50% of your time just feeding the organisation, and then you're left with no real energy in which to do the work that really matters. What I try to do in our project is I try to be the guy who feeds the monster, and I leave all the workers to do the work. So what they're doing is front line. I'll do all the stuff in the background, let me worry about that. I'll feed the monster, I give the government what they want, I give the policy makers what they want, I give the funders what they want. You do 30 of that, and 40 of that, and 50 of that. Yeah.
Because sometimes people, and I've noticed this, sometimes people, whenever we're talking about maybe, what would you like to see improved or changed, a lot of the time the first thing that people say is more funding, and that obviously has a place, but it's kind of touted as if that's the be all and end all, but that's obviously something that you don't agree with. Am I right in saying?
No, it's not that I don't agree. I mean, the reality is none of us are paid what we should be paid. Like, very few of us. I mean, I can go into the private sector or into the public sector and have a small percentage of the responsibility that I have and get paid twice as much, right? So I'm not saying pay me pay me below what I'm, but like we should get to a point where we are paid what the value of our labour is.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is, do not let the targets that your funder sets limit the parameters of how you do your work Monday to Friday or Saturday to Sunday or whatever, because there's far more room. I mean, filming the Daily Worm is a good example. Glóin and London don't get money for that. Upper Springfield youth team in Niall, we don't get money for that. We don't have to do it. Nobody's asked us to do it. We're doing it because it's a good thing. We're doing it because it's the right thing. So within our projects, there's probably, I would say, 70 to 80% of our work is delivering what government want us to deliver. But that's also stuff that we have earmarked as useful, and the other 20% then is us doing what we want to do. So we're pushing the boundaries constantly around time and space or whatever. There is a notion, there is a misconception that if you take government funding, then you sort of
a shill.
Taking the Queen's shilling and you're limited. And that can be true, but only if you let it be true. So we get money from the Department for Communities, we get money from the Education Authority. Both those pots of money allow us to do amazing work that really benefits our people. How they measure it is really, really limited. How they understand it is really, really limited, but allows us to do some seriously good stuff in the community. We get money from Children in Need, we get money from the Health Trust, we get money from Belfast City Council, we also get money from Big Lottery and stuff like that. So a whole mishmash of funding who all want their thing. We don't go for any money that's dragging us down a road that we don't want to go down. We will not do that. Some organisations will, because the imperative to feed the beast is so strong that they will go for a tender or an application which is giving them £1 million to do something that they don't really believe in. Right? I would never do that. So we only go for money that we think allows us to do what we want to do, and at the same time try and push the boat out. And that's not to critique those groups who do that, because like a lot of them have employees and have staff, and do you know what I mean? Sometimes they go for a funding because people have mortgages to pay. So there is practical realities. Just don't let it limit you. Would be my feeling on it.
Yeah. That's very interesting as well, because it kind of puts it in the context then too, you know, whenever you're pushing the boat out and doing things like founding, failing, like an e-garma, you know, you kind of have to say, you know, you kind of have to very willingly give yourself more work to do for the same amount of money. You know, you're effectively, I suppose, if, you know, in pure mathematical terms, you're reducing your hourly rate, you know, for instance, but 100%. That is the kind of the way it seems to be, you know, which is, and then feeds into, of course, the pay disparities, and especially in the community sector, you know, people not being, in many cases, paid a deserving wage, you know, for the work that they're doing.
And again, this is some of the areas where there is development. There is almost like, because we come from the community sector has developed a political action culture and the community activist culture. There was a sense that almost like if you were getting paid, somehow you were compromising yourself. But in order for us to deliver the services and the quality of services that people deserve, whether that's youth work or after schools or schools or whatever, you need to pay for it, right? So you need to pay what people deserve, and there is no, you don't get into heaven at the end of it because you worked for 50% of what you're entitled to do. So I think of it as a community sector, and I would have been one of those people who would have been very critical of people on what I would describe as big wages. But at the same time, like, people are entitled. Like, if you look at the head of Unison, or the head of SIP2, or the principal of the local secondary school, or the head of consultancy at Royal Victoria, I mean, the RVHs, they get paid what they're due. They don't say, because I'm helping people here, I'll do it for 20% of what I'm worth. So as a community sector, we need to begin, I think, factoring in that value much more and trying to come up, and this is the difficulty, how do you come up with a coherent long-term sustainability funding strategy which pays people what they're worth with the same rates and entitlements that we get? Because here's the other power tax, is the reason we get the money is because the state knows that we're cheaper. Yeah. So it's much cheaper to pay Gloria and Mona whatever it is, Mickey Mouse money to go and deliver youth services than it is for the Education Authority to deliver themselves. Because our Education Authority deliver themselves, they have to have proper sick leave, maternity cover, paternity cover, all that stuff, you know, liabilities to the hill. You give it to a voluntary organisation for 80% of the money and let them worry about employment rates. And then a lot of the organisations, because we're that short-term funding, you don't really know where your next paycheck is, where your next funding's coming from. So you haven't really got the money to give people out of the rights and entitlements that they actually should be entitled to.
Yeah, because it is obviously a tactical decision then by the state. That is very true. And you were just speaking there about the having in the future a kind of a more sound funding strategy, and that leads on to the next question, which was, you know, what would, and I suppose it's a broad question, but you've already begun to answer, you know, what vision do you have for the Upper Springfield, West Belfast community, you know, in the years ahead, you know, short term but long term as well, you know, where do you see it all going?
I think there's a real issue. There's a real issue of just responsiveness and firefighting within the community in general, and a problem. We have great problem solvers. Our local political reps and our community organisations are brilliant problem solvers. So a problem emerges, we meet, we explore, we discuss, we try our best to solve it. But what we're really poor at doing is long-term planning and looking at the potholes and problems that are coming down the lane. So while we are punching above our weight, I look at the deprivation indicators for the Upper Springfield, we should be a much worse community in which to live. I am raising my family in the Upper Springfield, and my kids are having a good life. You know, they have good schools, they have good facilities, they're happy and they're content. The reality is, once they go through the door and out the door and down to the main third floor at the top of the White Rat, there's some greater risks associated with living in this community than there is, say, living a mile away. And so we need to try and eradicate that. But we don't have the vision for what we need. So there's a serious housing crisis, but at the same time, we can't keep building as many units as possible on whatever available land or green space there is. So there's like a balance to be struck between the housing demand and protecting green space and protecting public space. There's a demand in terms of bringing in employment, because we know people need jobs and want jobs, but if those jobs have no rights, entitlements, job security, then does that really? I mean, does that really transform you? That transform us? The amount of people who are living like in sort of real stress around making choices around feeding their families and heating their houses and heating their homes. They're really. So one of the things we need is a vision for West Belfast that's not based on the latest problem. I'll give you an example in the Upper Springfield. In the Upper Springfield, there is currently we are top of the pops in terms of socio-economic indicators. We have 11 housing estates and a traveller settlement, more than 11,500 residents in the area, and we are under pressure in socio-economic terms. 120 homes is earmarked for the old St George site at the side of Dermot Hill, 600 homes for the Glenmona site, and up to 40 homes Biffy, 28 homes at the foot of the Black Mountain. Now, that's over 1,000 homes coming into the area. And when I say homes, I'm saying that in the loosest possible sense. What you have is 1,000 housing units with human beings that are going to be put in them. No sense of building communities, no sense of connecting those new residents to the community that already exists. No sense of do these developments enhance what already exists, complement what already exists, connect to what already exists. No sense. So what happens is within those residents, there's going to be 4 or 5 separate residential areas built. They're going to be cul-de-sacs with one way in, one way out, not connected to the communities that exist whatsoever. And the local community is going to cross its fingers and close its eyes and hope that the people who get into those social houses are sound enough and don't wreck our place. No sense of actually planning development in any sense, no sense of building communities, no sense of looking at how we distribute homes effectively. And that's going to cause us loads of problems down the line. You're going to bring 1,000 more people in. So services are already bursting at the seams, another 1,000 homes. So there's no sense of vision. And despite the fact that we have greater access to corridors of power than we have ever had, we don't seem to be any further on in our capacity to future-proof what we're doing and to look 10, 15 years ahead. So there is a challenge for us within the community. Is like, what type of community do we want to live in? So we want homes for people. We want those homes to be based in communities. Those homes should be future-proofed in terms of like their energy efficiency, the amount of natural light goes into them, the amount of play space that's available to them, you know, basic things. Everybody in this community should have like some sort of basic income, which means that they don't have to choose between heating their home or feeding their family. That's some of the things that we need to look at, but we need to do it within the wider politics of like what type of country do we want to live in as well, you know?
Yeah. Very good. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me there, Niall. It was really interesting conversation, and I could continue speaking for a long time. But Niall, thanks very much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Okay, Dan.